Okay, well that's it from the Valleys, from the South's dressing rooms, of course. It was the end of our football for 1979 on behalf of David Wright and myself. I hope you enjoyed the replay, and I'll catch you again next Saturday morning. Joanne, good evening, and thanks for being with us.
Blue, white, four brothers, so cheer up, my lives back home. Nobody knows what a team we are, so cheer up, my lives back home. Up, brothers!
Went to Morris Brothers College, Ashgrove, played first 15 there in 1956. Come out of there, stayed in Brisbane because there was no work down here. Well, this is where I live, right here at North Kira. And a fellow by the name of Percy Berrigan in Malula Bar Surf Club, and he was also a Big Brothers selector and what have you. He knew my father. And he lived at West End and I lived at West End, and he said, well, you better come down and play rugby league for Brothers. So that was 1957, I played under 17. Oh, sorry, 58, played under 17, and then 59, I played under 18. And basically, Byron Davies was the Australian captain. He was one of the first guys to go to Sydney and play. And he went down there in 1960, and he was their goal kicker, and Brothers were the premiers in 59. No, they got beaten in 59 by Norths. Anyhow, they used to play 4 sort of unorganised trial games, basically, for the start of the year. And they lost the first 3 on goal kicks. And the guy who was the first grade hooker was a fellow by the name of Phil Coman, and he was my coach in the under-18s. And they're sitting around having a beer after the 3rd trial, and they're saying, who can we get to kick goals? And Coman said, I got a kid in my team, kick goals from anywhere. And they said, what's his name? He said, George Doniger. Said, where does he play? He said, he plays lock forward or second row. Well, tell him he's playing in the centres next week against Wests at the exhibition ground. So that's how I come. Here I am in the centres. My opposing centres were Collie Ware, who was a Queensland representative, and Alec Watson, who was an Australian representative. And here I am, just turned 19, out there looking at these blokes, talking about running on feet of fear. I mean, realistically, and so I finished up kicking 5 goals and scoring a try, and never, ever played reserve grade. Just, you got to be lucky. You got to take your chances when you can, and that's how I started with 1 trial, and then first grade from then on. Great characters, some great characters in most teams. Barry Muir was playing, and Garbo was always a headline kind of thing. For East, Bobby Hagan, Toddy McCartney, these kind of blokes. Souths, Henry Holloway, Frankie Drake, kind of thing. There was a lot. Wynnum, Lionel Morgan was playing for Wynnum. There was characters in each team. A lot of respect, but then again, there was no big pardons either. You copped it, and that was it. There were some pretty tough boys around, like Henry Holloway and, Normie Pope and these kind of blokes. They didn't take anything, and they give plenty. I mean, my first game in 1960, after that trial game, was against Norths, and that was the team. The first game of the year used to be the grand finalist from the year before, right? And Billy Pearson, big Billy Pearson, lovely bloke, he was playing for Norths. Anyhow, he's given me the big whoosho, and I've gone down. And when I did get up, and shook my head, and Pedro Gallagher's into him, righto, and half a blue, you know, and Billy Pearson put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Hey kid, that's for nothing. Well, you do something." I've gone, well, what am I doing here? In those days, everybody wore leather boots. I actually had these ones handmade by a fellow named of Baines, and we've got his name pencil there. You'll see the tags on the right-hand boot here. These two are gone back, and that one's in the middle. Well, that was because when I was kicking goals, these ones here were sort of a bit close, and you had to dig your own mound in those days. And of course, we put the tags back a bit so you didn't hit the ground as you were following through. It seems ridiculous in this day and age when they're pink, purple, and green and yellow kind of thing, to think that that's what we used to wear 60 years ago. And that's what you got for being the top point scorer in Brisbane Rugby League. As you can see, she's been in the box for a while. It used to have a Bakelite base, and it used to have a lid. I don't know where the lid got to, but that's what you got. You didn't get any money, but you got a big cup, all right? As I said before, I will, because there's no Brisbane Rugby League anymore, I will always be the youngest player to ever win the Brisbane Rugby League top point scoring competition. And I did it in 1960, and I was still 19 years old. I wasn't 20 until the October. So that's one thing I can put in my hat. And to score over 200, we used to play 21 competition games, 3 rounds of 7. To score over 200 was basically something to be aimed for, you know. I finished up scoring 210 points with goals, which is an average of 10 points a game. And I scored 7 tries, so it was basically 231 points for the year, which doesn't sound much by today's standards, but it was a pretty big milestone back in those days. I remember one game against South at Davies Park, and we won, and I think I kicked 5 or 6 goals, it didn't matter. But I missed tackles, and I just didn't have a good game, and we used to go to the old Hickey's Dairy out at Corbett Park, and then we were sitting there, and I was sitting there with Pedro and Gallagher and Stan Jackson, and I'm just sort of saying, "Oh, geez," I said, "you know, I'm not real happy." And Pedro put his arm around me and he said, "Dunk." Duncan was my nickname, Dunk. Any day he kicked 10 points, he said, "You're in my team, all right?" Trying to make me feel better. I retired basically in '65. I snapped an anterior cruciate ligament in the middle of '64. And in those days, yes, I went to the General Hospital and they opened it up, and it was a fellow by the name of Dr. Robin Tuffley. And they opened you up and had a look and saw it was an anterior cruciate, sewed you back up again and said, "See you later," you know. And he said to me, he said, "If you're a racehorse, we'd put you down, obviously." He said, "But we're not doing that." He said, "And that's going to cause you a lot of problems." And I said, "Well, thank you for that. That's good news all around, isn't it?" I said, how do I delay the problems? He said, "Keep your weight down and keep the muscles in your leg strong." He said, "And don't play touch football, and don't play golf, and anything to do with movement of the knee." So I took that on board, and I finished up running 50 full marathons over 20 odd years, and into the triathlons and that kind of thing. And it never ever came against me. But the weight thing is the major one, because I know plenty of people in that era who had the same injury and it couldn't be fixed, and they had a lot of trouble late in life. So I was lucky, to tell you the truth. I had no idea and no inclination, and there was never ever anything that in my life that was going to indicate that I'd be on doing the sports scene and match of the day. Right here at this surf club in 1967, 68, 69, I was president, and the very first live broadcast of a surf carnival was done from North Kira in 1968. Carnival out here, the Cravenay Carnival. And Clive Harburg, you might have heard of him, he was the #1 commentator for the ABC in Brisbane. In those days they did everything, cricket, swimming, football, surf lifesaving. Arthur Donovan was his backup man. North Kira was a very small area in those days, and Clive couldn't find North Kira, so come time to do the broadcast, the director said, "Hey, GD, what's going to do?" He said, "Up you go." So I went up, called the surf carnival, and that was that. A guy playing reserve grade, Donnie Wilson, who's gone, in 1970, when they were putting the Sports Scene show together, they were having lunch in the cafeteria at Channel 7, and he heard the directors and the producers talking about putting together the Sports Scene show, and they wanted new faces. They didn't want people that had been on television before, and they were trying to toss up rugby league. And Donnie Wilson said, "What about Georgie Doniger?" And this Don Brandham said, he was a director. "Who's he?" He said, "He played for Brothers, kicked bloody goals from everywhere, you know, top point scorer, and done a outside broadcast for the ABC, and people are still talking about it." "Oh, yeah, I do remember him." So I get a phone call, and we're up at work, and this bloke says, "You know, Don Brandham, we want you to come up and talk to us about this new sports show." In those days in the surf club, it was a big joke to set somebody up, right? So I politely said, "Thank you very much, but sorry," you know. About 3 hours later, this bloke walks in and he said, "Is George Doniger here?" And one of the other blokes said, "Yeah, he's over there." It was Don Brandham. They've come to me and said, "Hey, sorry, this is not a joke." So that's how it actually started, right? Simple as that. Just by Donnie Wilson saying something in a cafeteria that said, "This bloke can do it." And that was it. And of course, the Sports Scene show started on the 10th of May 1970 with just Frank O'Callaghan and Rod Gallegos and myself as a half-hour program. Of course, it went from half an hour to 3.5 hours over the years. And then, of course, that was 70. And then 1972, got Mick Vivers on board, and the famous Channel 7 Rugby League match of the day, 6:30 to 7:30 on a Saturday and a Sunday night. Still is the longest running, highest rating television program in Queensland history, the match of the day. Black and white television, 2 cameras, no monitors, no instant replay, just get up there and do it, GD. You know, that was what it was like. I do remember I got into, not into trouble, but the director, Don Brandham, was a funny man. He loved his football. And I did an interview with them after the game, I think, and I asked the question, I said, you know, something like, "Where do you think we went wrong?" You know, we as in brothers, instead of saying, "Where do you think you went wrong?" He said, "Oh, lovely, GD, you're really showing your true colours here, aren't you?" You know, I used to stand up. Calling the games, right? I had a proper thing made here. You can see it on this photo, a microphone. And I used to stand up and I used to duck and weave and dive and people used to sit over in the old Frankburg stand with their binoculars watching me calling the games. But that was sort of, you had to have that total immersion, and I just didn't have it in '88. So that's when I finished. I think I finished there, my business career. I mean, I wasn't academic basically, but sport brothers got me started in a sales career, and then in television. So basically what I did, I got bugger all money out of television, but I just used the personality, the notoriety, to get myself set up in business. And basically Super Cheap Autos Started out basically as George Doniger's car accessories. One of my message boys at Myers, who's now a billionaire, Reggie Rowe, he was my message boy. He went on to become Australian buyer for car accessories. Then he decided he better start his own business. He coined the name International Auto Accessories. He found out that it wasn't all that easy to be in business, and he knew he had to get some kind of presence. So he come to me and said, what say we do a deal? So we changed the name from International Auto Accessories to George Doniger's Car Accessories. And within 3 years, we had 8 stores around Brisbane. At the same time, that was in 1976, five. At the same time, as I said, because I had the end in the shopping centres with those, 2 guys come up from Adelaide looking for someone to start the Wendy's Super Sundays ice cream business in Queensland. They started in Adelaide and they knew it wasn't going to take off down there. Let's get up to the Sunshine State. So they went to the shopping centre managers and my name come up 4 or 5 times. So they gave me a ring. Wanted to talk to me, and people used to ring me about doing, you know, guest speaking and what have you. Had a mate of mine who had an accountancy business and he was in the same building as me. So he became my manager, inverted commas. So if these people rang up, I'd say, look, you've got to talk to my manager. As soon as I hung up, I'd ring him and say, hey, you're going to get a phone call from so-and-so. Anyhow, he gets the phone call and then he rings me back. He said, you know what? He said, this doesn't look too bad. He said that, like, the thing that worried me about the car accessories was in those days we were still carrying a couple of $1 million worth of stock, you know, and stock is dangerous, shall we say. It's okay if you turn that over. And he said, this looks pretty good. He said, you know, it's all the money's in the setup. He said, what say we go to Adelaide and have a look? So I went to Adelaide and had a look and did a deal, and thereby hangs a tale. So basically started Wendy's Super Sundays 1980. I sold 1980, sold back the George Doniger name back to, or Reg, I think it was 82. And I said, what are you going to call it, Reg? He said, I'm going to call it Super Cheap. I said, mate, it's the wrong name. So how wrong can you be, all right? So that continued me through Wendy's from 80 till basically 98. And I sold out of that business. Tried to retire, become a consultant, and I learnt after that that if you call yourself a consultant, you don't actually have a real job. If people come to pay you money to tell you how to open a franchise, they go and do their own thing, come back and blame you. So boom, I said, no thank you, I'm out of this. And of course I'd come back home by then. I'd lived down here basically since the early 80s, and tried to retire and bugger that. So found a little old rundown IGA supermarket over at Currumbin Waters in the year 2000. When I was only 60, took that over, made a roaring success out of that from 2000 to 2010, and a couple of young Indian boys come in with a big bag full of rupees, so I leg roped them to the counter, and that was that. That was 2010. So basically I've been retired literally since I was 70, right? But people sort of say, you know, what do you do all day, GD? I say, I don't really know. But if you've got 3 kids and 3 grandkids, you've always got something to do, all right? And I consider myself one of the most fortunate people in the world to be coming up 81, still fit and healthy, and have been able to meet the people I've met through my life and done the things that I've done. There's another old mate of mine who I ran probably 15, 16 marathons with, who died of cancer at 72. He was older than me. 10 years older than me. He started gold top pies, by the way, the old square top pies, old Bluey Bell. And his philosophy on money, people think you got to have a lot of money. No, you don't. His philosophy was, and it's great, all you need is enough to do the things you want to do when you want to do them. That's the qualifying factor. So therefore, you can't just have a 9-to-5 job working at Coles as such, because you've got to ask somebody when you can do it. But if you think about it long enough, you don't need $1 billion or even $1 million, enough to do the things you want to do when you want to do it. That's what I consider being financially stable as such. My father is the highest decorated lifesaver in Australia. He rescued 2 blokes from a shark at Kira in 1937, both of whom deceased. One on the beach. Like, it was an amazing story when you think about it. It's amazing what you'll do in a circumstance. You don't know what you can do in a circumstance until it's hit you. They're out surfing in the afternoon. This is when Kira was Kira, basically. He comes along to join them, and as he's walking down the beach, he sees 4 or 5 of them thrashing, coming in, going for it. He gets down to the edge of the water, and his brother Gordon was one of them coming in. He said, "Joe, don't go out there. A shark's just hit Jack." So what's he do? He starts swimming straight out. He gets out to Jack Brinkley, and Norm Gervin was there with him, and Gervin was supporting him, and he said he'd been hit as well, Gervin, but not as bad. And he said, "Joe, take Jack, he's worse." He brought him in to waist deep water, gave him to the blokes on the beach, went back out again, can you believe? By the time he got out there, Gervin had basically disappeared. Parts of his body were washed up at Doniger and Tugun over the next couple of days. It's the only registered shark attack where they could prove that the same shark killed 2 people at the one time, because they caught the shark not the next day but the day after at Kira, and when they opened him up there was bits of each body in there. So my old man was obviously Kira's favourite son, right? And he was a very good surf swimmer, ski paddler, R&R, the works. But we lived over there, and there wasn't a lot of people lived around here. There wasn't a lot of people on holidays. But the Christmas New Year period of 1949, 48, 49, there was 3 people drowned here. And my old man, being the lifesaver that he was, and being not to be told you can't do it, said, you know, we'll start a surf club. So he got a few of the local people, and that's the start of the story, right, basically. Then I did my bronze in 1958. And then I was a captain from 61 to 64, I think, yeah, 61, 64, treasurer 65, and then I come back as president or not come back, but president in 67, 68, 69, basically. And then, of course, the family was happening, the television started, I was still involved, but not as an active member as such. So the club sort of just went further and further forward. And then when I finished on television, that was literally when we moved back down here from Brisbane. I became involved with the club again, and as I said to a lot of people, you can tell when you're getting old, all right? 1, you have your first great-grandchild. 2, you have more trouble putting your underpants on. But the defining factor is when you know you're getting old is when they ask you to be patron of the surf club. And I've been patron here for the last 5 years, and I consider it just a great honour and a privilege to be still actively involved with the club. I'm coming up 81, right? And when I turned 80 last year, someone said to me, you should write down the turning points in your life. And I thought to myself, that's not a bad idea. So I did, I sat down. And the first turning point was going to Morris Brothers, right? The second most important turning point was basically making the Brothers first grade side at age 19. That literally changed my life because I was George Doniger, you know, superhero, bloody rugby league player, you know, kind of thing. And then it went from there to 1960. Had to put in 1964 getting married. Then I had to go to 1970 when I started on television, you know, kind of thing. So as far as Brothers are concerned, if I had played that trial game at the exhibition ground and missed 5 tackles and didn't kick 6 goals and score a try, end of story. That's what it boils down to. To have the opportunity to have that trial game, to get picked in the first grade side, to play for the next 5 years, to play Bulimba Cup and what have you, that very, very, very big turning point in my life, and I shall be forever grateful to Brothers Rugby League for that opportunity and meeting so many great guys, simply great guys. Yeah. You really can't buy those kind of memories. You can't buy them. You've got to be there. You've got to be amongst it. You've got to be playing with the guys, you know. They just had the most amazing camaraderie and friendship and love. You know, we bloody loved each other. I count myself very fortunate, very, very fortunate. Just remember, keep smiling. The qualifying end of that is, keep smiling. The boss will never know what you're thinking.
And by golly, both of them have played that way, David.
Yes, it's been a very strong match.
Go, Wally Lewis to McWhirter. What about that Wally Lewis as a footballer? McWhirter puts it down.